We are speaking with the one and only legendary Canadian, Andy Curran. You have to throw in legendary. It's important.
Salut, monsieur. Comment ça va?
Bonjour. Good, good. So I was just on the phone with a gentleman called Monsieur Pierre Paradis, and he was like, well, you've got to tell Andy hello for me. And then he started telling me about, Coney Hatch opened up for Iron Maiden in 1983. I think that's the first time I met him. Is that recollection from Pierre correct? Was that where you first met?
Well, it absolutely is, and Pierre is one of my favorite Quebecers, as you are, and I've known him for quite some time. I'm trying to think of when I first met Pierre Paradis, aka Pete Paradise. I think he was the manager of Voivod, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be.
Yeah.
Now he's doing some stuff with Harmonium, but let's get us back to what fans might find interesting. And before we get to your releases of Caramel and Leisureworld and all that, what was that 1983 tour like for Iron Maiden? And was that one of those where Donald K. Donald, which is a Canadian promoter, comes to you and says, oof, you've got the goods? Or did you have to audition? Did you have to, you'd have to twist arms? Just talk to me about the Iron Maiden experience.
Well, no, that's a great question, Mitch. And Donald K. Donald was a big supporter of Coney Hatch. For anybody who knows our band, they know that we might have played more in Quebec than we did in Ontario. We used to play the Mustache Club and Cirque Electrique in Quebec City and the Maples and everything. So we had a lot of great times in Montreal. But actually, the Iron Maiden tour, from what we were told at the time when we got it, and then was confirmed by Steve Harris, the bassist, was they were aware of Coney Hatch because of all of our MTV play that we had with Devil's Deck, and we had previously toured with Judas Priest on the Screaming for Vengeance tour. And from what I understand, specifically, Steve was a fan of the band. We were literally invited out on that tour, the Peace of Mind tour, and we shared the stage with Maiden and Fastway. So that was pretty cool to. Struck up a friendship with Dave King from Fastway, but the Maiden guys, they just rolled out the red carpet for us. They were so kind, and I brought my tennis racket on the road to eliminate the boredom, Mitch. Between gigs, and that's where we really struck up a friendship with Steve Harris and I. And he came barging in the dressing room one day, and he said, "Which one of you guys has your tennis racket here?" And that's me. So next thing you know, we're playing tennis as much as we could on days off or even day of the show. Wow. And that really cemented the friendship. And as you know, to this day, I think the last time you and I saw each other was at an Iron Maiden show in Montreal.
Yeah.
So, and that led to Steve inviting Coney Hatch out to open up for British Lion the last time we were through Montreal and Quebec. So
that's right.
But my God, what if you were to be able to go back in time and pick a record to tour off of with Maiden, that arguably might have been, at the height of their career, even though they're probably bigger today. But that Peace of Mind tour was incredible. I think we were out for approximately 2.5 to 3 months with them.
Wow. And isn't it amazing that these bands that have these 40, 50, 60-year careers, when you hear the stories, it's always about how nice they were, how much they gave us stage, how much. And then you hear some other bands that sort of came and went, and you always hear these stories about they cut the stage, they cut the. Being nice goes a long way, I think, to keeping you in the game.
It does, and we excuse me, we had for the most part, I think we've been treated fairly well by everybody. But I'm a big Crocus fan. When that band first hit, I remember, I was listening to a lot of UFO and Saxon, Judas Priest, and excuse me. Anyway, we ended up getting the opening slot with Crocus, and those guys barely.
You're having the same morning cough as me, by the way.
Yeah, sorry.
Breakfast is still with us.
They barely said hello to us, and it was kind of disappointing when you're a fan of the band, right?
Yeah, it is. Bruce Kulick of Kiss once, I kept saying, I want to meet Ace Frehley. I want to meet Ace Frehley. I want to meet. And he goes, Mitch, just remember this. You don't want to meet your heroes because they'll never live up to what you have in your head. And it's just like, and by the way, I've met Ace, and he was perfectly nice, but I get it, because you have this image, and then it's not the image, and you go, damn it.
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand. I've got a couple friends that worked with Kiss, and they were touring with Aerosmith, and they invited me out to the show. And one of the guys said, "Would you like to meet the band? Would you?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'd really like to meet Steve Tyler." And he was like, "I know you love Steve Tyler. You might not want to meet him." And I could see him in the background, Mitch. And I was like, "Okay, do I exactly what you said? Do I ruin my my perception
Perception.
of one of my heroes here?" So I opted not to meet Steven Tyler that day and just keep him on the pinnacle that I have him on. But it does go a long way. There was a very much a community vibe on that Peace of Mind tour. A lot of hanging out with both bands backstage afterwards, and we kind of got snubbed by the Crocus guys. So that was like, okay, well, I guess we're not hanging out with them tonight.
Okay. That'll be the title of your next album, Snubbed by Crocus. Coney
Yeah,
Hatch, Snubbed by Crocus.
that is a good title for a live record that we're working on.
Yeah, so the live at the El Mocambo. You can get signed copies right now. Just quickly talk to me about that one. And I see the screaming title, their first live album. What took so long to get there?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know, in the era that I certainly grew up with, I can remember some of the biggest artists, really popping off the live record, because it was a great it was a great snapshot of their sound. Obviously, Frampton Comes Alive. I wore that one out. Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, another great live album. I think Kiss Alive. I wasn't a huge Kiss fan, but that one certainly, popped them into the stratosphere. The AC/DC, If You Want Blood live record. So in the spirit of that record, excuse me for one sec. In the spirit of that, we ended up thinking that it would be a good time finally to try to do a live Coney Hatch record, because a lot of people have said that that's their favorite, I guess, their favorite representation of the band. There's no, it's what you see is what you get. Two guitars, bass, drums, vocals. It's kick-ass four on the floor. So I don't know what took us so long, but we had the opportunity. We were invited by the CEO and the owner of the El Mocambo to come and play. He said, "I know you guys played the El Mocambo in 1983. What do you think about coming back?" So it was on his invitation, Mitch, that the whole thing started to just steamroll.
Yeah, and here it is. So now fans can get it. It's signed. I'm going to just move to these other projects, because you've got so many. So yesterday, and I'll get to Caramel and Leisureworld, but yesterday I was talking to Michael Levine of Triumph, and they had this new 40th anniversary of Allied Forces. And during the conversation, Mike goes, "Oh yeah, it's Andy Curran who put all that together." So explain that work, and how did you come about all this Triumph stuff and assembling that?
Yeah. No, Mike and the boys in Triumph had been friends of mine for a very long time, and it actually dates back to, I think, maybe 84 or 85, when Coney Hatch did a handful of Western Canadian dates opening up for Triumph. So there was always a friendship there. I've recorded quite a few times at Metalworks, and have a good friendship with Gilmore. So excuse me, those guys were aware that I had done a lot of work with Anthem Records, and had curated the box sets of the anniversary box sets for 2112 and A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres. And they called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, we're planning on doing this box set. Do you think you'd be able to come over and work with us and do something similar that you did with Rush? We love the work that you did with Rush." They were aware of the Max Webster box set that I curated. So Mitch, this, that there's sort of a whole other side to what I do. I'm yes, first and foremost a musician, but I've worked in, managed to transition into the business side. So I love putting together those box sets, man. It's like being part of the band. You go in, you get to uncover stuff out of the archives and everything. So that's what I did. I helped them curate the 40th anniversary of Allied Forces, which is coming out for Record Store Day, and just having the band allow me to sneak peek and go rummaging through the mezzanine at Metalworks and find all this great stuff for it. That was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing that. So I'm kind of like a gun for hire when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's not a bad side gig to rummage through the vaults of Rush and Max Webster and and Triumph. And but okay, so let's get to your vaults, because you went
Yeah,
rummaging through your vaults during the pandemic, and I'm going to start with Leisureworld from 2002.
yeah.
You have said publicly that it is your favorite collection of songs. So first of all, let's qualify that. What does that mean? Because obviously you're proud of the Coney Hatch stuff. Obviously you're proud of Caramel. Obviously you're proud of the other stuff. But what does that mean that these are the songs that sort of resonate the most with you?
Yeah, again, an awesome question, buddy, and thank you for shouting it out. During the course of pandemic, I think like a lot of people, I started purging and looking to clean up my studio first and foremost. And my wife is one of my best pals, and she was like, "Dude, your studio's a gong show, and what are all these boxes filled with cassettes, and what are those tiny little tapes? Oh, those are DAT tapes, digital audio tapes. Well, what are you doing with them, right?" So. Um, when the Leisureworld record, which is probably the last sort of major label release that I did, was out on early 2000s, and I had a deal with a company called Artist Direct. And Ted Fields was one of the founders of Interscope and signed the band. We had quite a lot of action going on with a song called "I'm Dead." It was top 10 in Boston, in Milwaukee, and a few other markets. And anyway, we got scooped up and signed very quickly. Similar to the Caramel record, the record company went bankrupt or just folded, like, 2 months after. So the honeymoon was over before we even did very much. There was a smattering of tour dates, and in the US and stuff like that. But I realized that those records had never been available on Amazon or Spotify or Apple or any of those platforms. And my brothers and a few of my friends were like, "Dude, why can't we get Leisureworld on Spotify?" And I said, "Because I haven't done a deal for it." So a very good friend of mine in Nashville, Randall Foster, he has a company called Symphonic Distribution. I called him up and I said, "Just for bragging rights and for closure, can you help me with this? I've cleaned up my studio. I've found a bunch of old master tapes that have never been up digitally." So he said, "Absolutely, I'll help you with that." So that's what we did. We worked very closely, and I got Harry Hess from Harem Scarum to remaster some stuff for me. And we just bundled them all up together and finally got them out. So it was like a nice moment for me to go, "There you go," to my brothers and friends. It's up, right? And to answer your last question, um, as a musician, I look back over the body of work that I was involved in, and just the sound and the production in the songwriting and the team that we put together, Randy Cook on drums and Simon Brierly on guitar. And just thinking back about the making of that record, I'm just so proud of it, Mitch. And if you were to say to me what song or piece of music really embodies where your headspace is musically and still is today, it would be the Leisureworld record. A lot of disappointment that I never really got to go out and support it and tour it, but I don't know, it's just a combination of everything. I especially love the production on it. I co-produced it with Vic Florencia, who is a Juno award-winning mixer and engineer and co-producer. And it's a very it's a very alternative, angry, rocking sounding record. It started to get me into loops and vibes and just being atmospheric and not having to pedal to the metal every song, but it just creates some vibes. And I really enjoyed making that record, which is probably why I'm so proud of it.
I'm so proud of it. Just before I get over to Caramel, you mentioned that you've been training real hard in the hopes of the Blackhawks, the Chicago Blackhawks, calling you up to the NHL someday. How is your NHL career coming along?
Not good right now because of the COVID lockdown of the rinks. But
Oh,
prior to our premier Doug Ford locking things down, Mitch, I was still skating 2 to 3 times a week, hoping that one of the scouts from the Blackhawks might just hear about my prowess on the ice with a high rising slap shot. But like a lot of Canadian kids, my first love and desire was to be in the National Hockey League. And once I got a little bit older and everybody started getting bigger and I started getting skinnier and getting crunched on the ice all the time, I played right up until the end of high school hockey. And then I just realized, like, Curran, you don't have the goods to go to the show. So I focused on music after that.
I was going to say here, I grew up I grew up living next to Ken Dryden of the Montreal Canadiens, and somewhere on my desk I have an autograph, but I can't find. I was going to show it to you, but I grew up living next to it, so I understand the Canadian dream. And the good thing about living next to Ken Dryden, or near Ken Dryden, he was a street over actually, is that Halloween, instead of giving out candy, he'd give out Habs pucks, Montreal Canadiens pucks.
Are you serious? That's
yeah.
awesome.
And you have to remember in 76, 77, 78, there wasn't really that kind of merchandising where you could run down to the whatever and buy a Habs puck. You basically had to go to the forum and catch one. So for him to hand out one with a logo was like, oh, wow.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And, you know, just to quickly touch on Ken Dryden, because as a Blackhawk fan growing up, I can remember in 1972 where the Hawks had a really good handle on winning the Stanley Cup, and Ken Dryden stood on his head and Jacques Lemaire and a few other guys, Henri Richard, they were just like a thorn in my side for many years. But I ended up, speaking of box sets, I ended up doing a Stompin' Tom Connors reissue with some of his catalog stuff when I was over at Anthem. And when I was talking to Stompin' Tom's son, Stompin' Tom Jr., I said, who can we get to write the liner notes about your dad? And he said, you know, Ken Dryden would be a good choice. He's a big hockey fan. So I ended up calling Ken and asking him if he would mind contributing to that package. So anybody that's interested in hockey and Stompin' Tom, if you read the liner notes, they were eloquently composed by Mr. Ken Dryden, who is quite the gifted writer.
And I'll finish on one last thing with Ken Dryden before we move on. Early 90s, I was working on a TV show for PBS called The World in Review. And there was also The Editors. There was two shows I was filming at the same time. And we always had political guests. We had Robert Barassa. We had David, what was it? David Cameron, the Ontario Prime Minister back then? David?
Might have been, yeah.
And Ken Dryden was one of the guests. And he moved away from where I lived when I was like 10 or 11, you know, but there was a community pool and everybody. Anyway, so I'm in my mid-20s and Ken Dryden walks in and I walk right up to him just to say hello, because I was there to greet guests and stuff. And he goes, hey, Mitch Lafon from so-and-so from our town. And I was like, what? You remember? He goes, yeah, I always saw you at the pool. And I was like,
that's so cool.
And I mean,
Ken Dryden remembers me.
But it's not so much that he remembers me, it's that I was 11 years old and here I was like 24, 25, 15 years, and he remembers. And I was like, wow, what a memory. I mean, what a guy. I mean, just what a guy. And anyway,
I love the photos of him leaning on his goalie stick, when the play was down at the other end. As much as the Habs crushed my dreams back then and stole the Stanley Cup away from us, I still think one of the best all-time goalies ever.
Yeah, and when you talk about iconic images, we look at the the face paint for Gene Simmons, but when you talk about sports, that's an iconic image with that mask.
Absolutely.
Caramel, epic 3-year recording journey, as it says here, post your Juno Award. Was it just circumstance that made it last so long? Was it just it wasn't fully cooked early on and you had to just keep trying? What was the story with Caramel? Why did it take so long? By the way, do we say caramel or Carmel, depending if we're American or Canadian, right?
Exactly, right. I think for us it's caramel, and I used to eat them by the dozens, right? Speaking of Halloween, but great question again, and I'll tell you why it took so long. So post Juno Award, the quick story is that I was signed to Alert Records, and after getting nominated for 2 Junos and winning one of them, the very next conversation I had with them was that they weren't going to do another record with me. I don't know what was going on with the label. So anybody listening, and Mitch, this, the trials and tribulations of a musician, there's peaks and valleys. One day you're riding high, the next day you win a Juno Award and you don't have a record deal. So At the
Yep.
time, I was signed to a publishing deal with Sony Music Canada, and they had just built a beautiful facility in Toronto that included a recording studio. So they asked me, I had a meeting with them, and they said, "Hey, what do you want to do now? We can send you around, and you can do some co-writing with people in New York and LA," because I had co-written "Digging a Hole" with Gordie Johnson. I had co-written a bunch of stuff with Kim Mitchell, and they said, "So if you want to carve out a career as a songwriter, you can do that." And I said, "No, I'd prefer to make a record." And they said, "Well, our studio is really busy. You know, we've got Our Lady Peace in there, and we've got Junk House, and we've got Daddies of Eden." And they listed off pretty much the entire Canadian roster of the Sony Music domestic signing. And so yours truly was allowed to slot himself in on the downtime, courtesy of my publishing deal. It wasn't a freebie, because any of the money that I earned with my co-writes would go against the recording time. So that pretty much answers your question. Can you imagine trying to slot in the recording of your own record in and around about 10 other artists?
God.
And it got to the point, Mitch, where literally 2.5, 3 years later, we actually threw a party, my wife and I, that said we finally finished the frickin' record. And the interesting part about that was, being in Sony at the building, I had assumed that they would sign me as a Sony Music Canada act.
Right.
And they didn't. So
Fooled you, right?
they fooled me. I was like, no. And then the publishing company went, "Now what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I have some very good friends in Buffalo, New York. They have a company called Could Be Wild. They're a promotion team. They really like the record. Doug Dombrowski and Bruce Moser, they're iconic record business guys that you probably heard of." Anyway, they took my Caramel record. We did an independent pressing of it. We sent it out to some radio stations, and lo and behold, lightning struck, and we started to get a ton of airplay and all over the States, in California, in Boston again. And we ended up getting a bidding war on that record. And right underneath the noses of Sony Music Canada, Geffen came in. They flew to see the band at the Horseshoe, and basically walked into the dressing room after the show and said, "Welcome to the Geffen family." And the deal was on my desk 2 days later.
See?
And that was another lightning strike moment. And sadly, 2 or 3 months later, Geffen was absorbed by Universal. All the people were, they've dropped 90% of their bands. It was around the same time as Guns N' Roses, and Rob Zombie was another big act on the label at that time. So the guy that signed us was a really cool guy, and he said to me, "Andy, the ride's over. I'm getting fired next week, but I'm going to give you back your master tapes." And so they've sat in my studio since 1999. And I finally thought, "Curran, get off your ass and put these things up so people can hear them," right? But you mentioned it, like some of the stuff is, you can get the vinyl, you can order it through coneyhatch.com. There's a store section there. And on my website, andycurranmusic.com, you can find the Caramel and the Leisureworld records there, and links to all of the digital places to hear it.
And we'll finish on this one. You're also putting out the self-titled solo album from '91. By the way, talk to me just real quick. With all these different projects, were all of them intended to be bands that just and they just didn't develop, or were they always intended to be individual projects, one-offs? And here's Andy solo, here's Caramel, here's Leisureworld. What was sort of the grand scheme of thing with each?
I think for me, I've always felt more comfortable in bands as opposed to, "Hey, look at me, this is my solo project," So taking a page out of the Coney Hatch book, I'm that what I like to call my No Tattoos record, with License to Love, and my turned into the solo record. That was the label saying, "No, we're not interested in a band. We're interested in you," which was kind of a nice shot in the arm, but at the same time, awkwardly calling it after my name and then putting my mug on the front there. I never did that again after that, Mitch, because I was just like, I even later, there was another record called Andy Curran and Soho 69. And then I just cut off the Andy Curran and put Soho 69 on it. But it was a record company thing who said, this is going to be your solo album.
Wow.
So I'm talking to Tom Barry right now, and last year was the 25th anniversary of it, and we kind of missed it during COVID.
Yep.
So I told Tom that I had been purging and cleaning up my studio, and I found some great outtakes and some unreleased songs and some live versions of it. And what did he think about putting out a little, best of sort of that no tattoos thing? And he said, yeah, let's go for it. So that's what I'm working on right now, and
Wow.
hopefully in the summer, the same way that Caramel and Leisureworld were up, we're going to do that with the No Tattoos record.
You see, so all kinds of good things are happening. And just real quick on the self-titled solo album, after having been in a band and after having done a tour with Iron Maiden, after having all this stuff going on, was it sort of strange, or was the pressure too much, or it's like, it's Andy now, if Coney fails, well, we all fail. It's the three of us. Or if we succeed, it's it's the 3-4 of us that succeed. But is it different making a solo record where you go, oof, it's all me, sink or swim?
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that. I think I was so entrenched in just making the record that I never really realized that the focus would be, okay, Curran, you're on the hot seat now. I quickly formed a band with Glenn Milcham on drums, who plays in Blue Rodeo now, one of my favorite rock drummers. A collection of guitar players in Toronto that were buddies, and we just got busy like writing and recording, never really sort of focusing on the, okay, dude, now if anybody F's up, it's all going to be on you. But certainly once the record was out, realizing that the press and people like yourself didn't want to talk to anybody in the band, just me, I was like, oh my God, be careful what you bite off for here, right? And it was a very good ride. We had such a great time, did a lot of touring with Kim Mitchell, toured with Rick Emmett, talking about the Days of Triumph. We did a bunch of shows with them, toured with Haywire, did some dates with Glass Tiger.
Haywire, Dance Desire.
Yes,
Dance
dude.
Design. I bought that album.
Yeah, really great guitar player in that band. But I don't know. I didn't feel the pressure, Mitch, just because I was in it. I was
right
up to my eyeballs in everything, writing, producing, mixing. What's the artwork going to be? Who's the band going to be? Right.
God, boy, there's so many great Canadian bands. You got me all excited about Haywire. I bought that album. I thought that was a great album, and I saw them open for Honeymoon Suite at the Lone Star Cafe in Ottawa. Can't beat that. Can't beat that combination.
I think the guitar player and the lead vocalist were, in my mind, they were awesome. Both those guys. That was the band. That guitar player was very much like a Canadian Eddie Van Halen. I wish I could remember his name. He's a sweetheart. But we had a lot of fun touring with those guys.
I can't remember his name at all. I can picture the video and everything.
East Coast guys, right? I think they were from Halifax. So. Yeah.
Anyway, there we go. The history of Canadian music in half an hour. Head over to andycurranmusic.com, andycurranmusic.com. And on that, as we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup. Toujours un plaisir. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure too, buddy. And
by the way, I just noticed you're wearing a Blackhawks hat.
That's why I thought you were shouting out the Blackhawks. You're like, okay, Curran, you're wearing a Blackhawks hat again. But Mitch, it's always a blast. It's always a blast talking to you, brother. And hopefully I'll see you soon. I'd love to get out to Quebec one of these days. But you take care of yourself, and thanks for letting me hog up the airwaves again with you.
Toujours, absolutely.
All right.